She was 8 months pregnant, penniless, and completely alone when she bought a collapsed mountain cabin for the price of a used fridge. Everyone told her it was worthless, just junk, dust, and grief soaked into the wood. But what she found hidden beneath the floorboards would unravel a story that hadn't been spoken aloud in 50 years. And as she rebuilt that broken house, she discovered she wasn't just saving a roof over her head. She was restoring a legacy meant just for her. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories of resilience, legacy, and quiet miracles speak to you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story might just hit even harder than this one. The real estate agent didn't even get out of her truck. She just rolled the window down, flicked her sunglasses onto her head and said, "It's condemned. You really want to walk through it?" Maisie Harper stood barefoot in the dirt, one hand cradling her belly, the other shielding her eyes from the late summer Sunday. She looked at the cabin. The porch half collapsed, the roof bowed in the middle like it was tired of holding on. It wasn't even really a porch anymore, just old wood that remembered when it had been strong. "I'll take it," Maisie said, voice steady. The agent blinked. "You haven't even." "I said I'll take it." The paperwork was signed on the tailgate of the truck. $6,000. No inspections, no guarantees. Just a hand-scrawled line that passed a broken home from county records into Maisie's name. She didn't cry. Not then. She hadn't cried when Luke left either. 3 months earlier, after a fight about nothing that turned into everything. He'd taken the car, the bank account, and the future they were supposed to have. All she had left was what was inside her and what she could carry. The cabin had come from a classified ad in the back of a newspaper she found in a diner 2 towns over. Abandoned mountain home. As is. Remote. Cheap. She called that same day. Now, standing in front of it, she understood why it had been cheap. Shards of glass sparkled in the weeds near the front door. The shutters hung like broken arms. Inside, she could see furniture, or what used to be warped by years of rain and time. But still, there was something about it. Maisie stepped onto the first porch plank. It creaked, but held. She took another step, then another. The front door didn't have a lock. Just a rusted handle and a frame swollen with age. She pushed it open. The air inside was stale, like breath held too long. Dust particles spun in shafts of sunlight leaking through the cracks. Spiderwebs glistened in the corners like forgotten prayers. It wasn't just junk. It was a graveyard of someone's life. Stacks of books, rotted with mildew. A cracked tea set on a table with 3 legs. An old baby crib in the corner, its spindles broken, still painted soft yellow. She stood there, letting her eyes adjust, heart pounding. Then something caught her attention, not visually, but emotionally. A quiet pull toward the fireplace, dark and soot-stained. She stepped closer and saw something wedged just above the hearth. A tiny porcelain shoe, no bigger than a salt shaker. Maisie reached for it. The moment she touched it, something in the house shifted. It wasn't the structure. It was the silence. Like the house had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. "I don't need perfect," she whispered to no one. "Just possible." That first night in the cabin, Maisie slept on the floor beneath a broken window with only a thin quilt and her backpack tucked under her head. The wind whispered through the holes in the walls, and something scratched faintly in the attic above, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. Fear was a luxury she'd used up months ago. She wasn't brave, just emptied out. Hollow enough to walk into a ruined place and call it home. Her belly kicked, a small flutter against her ribs. "I know," she whispered. "We're not there yet, but we will be." At sunrise, she wandered the cabin in daylight. The light softened. The harsh edges made the warped floorboards look like waves instead of wounds. In the kitchen, a rusted cast-iron stove sat silent, its legs crooked like a drunk uncle. Cabinets hung open like mouths frozen mid-sentence, but it was the back room that gave her pause. The door was stuck, swollen into the frame. She leaned her weight into it gently at first, then with her shoulder. Finally, it groaned open. Inside, more dust, more disarray. But unlike the rest of the house, this room had been untouched by weather. No rain spots, no mold, just time. A wooden trunk sat in the corner beneath a sheet. She pulled the cover off slowly, stirring up a cloud of memory-smelling dust. The trunk was carved with initials. MW plus JW faded, but still visible beneath the grime. She lifted the lid. Inside were objects too carefully arranged to be called junk. A pressed bouquet, crumbling but still held together by ribbon. A small music box that didn't play. A child's drawing, stick figures holding hands beneath a triangle roof. Maisie held the paper in her hands, her thumb brushing the crayon sky. Her throat tightened. Who were they? What happened here? She was surrounded by ghosts, with no names, just echoes left in crayon and dried petals. She spent the next hours sweeping. Not to clean, but to reveal. Under the layers of dirt and decay, there were hardwood floors, patterned wallpaper, even a cast-iron bed frame half buried in a corner room. She didn't know what she was doing. Not really. She just knew she had to keep going. By dusk, her fingers were blistered, her legs sore, her stomach tight with hunger. But something inside her felt steadier. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a question waiting to be answered. As night fell again, she returned to the trunk. She took out the drawing and pressed it flat beneath her backpack. Then she whispered into the shadows, "If you left something behind, I'll find it." And the cabin, creaking in its bones, almost seemed to nod. The third morning, Maisie woke to birdsong and pain, a tight pinch in her lower back that vanished as quickly as it came. False labor, probably. She'd read about it in a book she stole from a laundromat shelf weeks ago. Still, it scared her enough to sit up slowly, cradle her belly, and whisper, "Not yet, we're not ready." She moved carefully through the cabin, rubbing her side, trying to shake the tension. The air felt heavier that day. Like the house knew she was getting closer to something she hadn't meant to find. She'd cleared most of the main room already, sweeping, tossing out shattered furniture, folding dust-covered linens into bags she'd burn later. But one spot kept catching her eye, a warped floorboard near the Rosnay Terkel d'Or hearth. It bowed upward slightly, like it had been pried once before. Maisie knelt down, hands trembling from effort, and ran her fingers along the edge. It moved. Not easily, but it moved. She wedged the edge of a broken spatula under the plank and pushed. The board gave with a groan and came up in her hands. Beneath it, a small hollow, and inside the hollow, a tin box. She hesitated. The metal was rusted shut in places, but she could feel the weight of it, heavier than it should have been. She took it to the light, sat cross-legged near the door, and began working it open with her nails and a bent fork. The lid popped with a hiss. Inside were paper and fabric aged, delicate. Letters, dozens of them, each tied with twine, addressed to, "My dearest M." Maisie lifted the first one out, unfolded it. The 3rd of June, 1954. You were gone. 3 days. And already the cabin doesn't sound right without you singing in the kitchen. I fixed the porch rail again, but I left the crooked. Step just how you like it. Something about your smile, when you trip on it, makes me feel like a man worth laughing at. Maisie read the rest in silence, her eyes moving slowly, reverently. The words were simple, but full of breath, of heart. A man writing to a woman he adored, not for grand moments, but for small ones. Letter after letter, she read about rainstorms and late nights, about peaches from the orchard, about a baby that never came. The back of her throat burned. These weren't just old words. They were a life, a love. Carefully tucked beneath the floorboards, as if someone wanted them remembered but couldn't bear to look at them anymore. She gathered them up, retied the twine, and held them to her chest. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Maisie winced, then smiled. "Yeah," she whispered. "I felt that too." Later that night, she sat by the fireplace, a blanket over her shoulders, rereading the first letter by candlelight. She imagined the woman it was, written to. M. Maisie. That realization hit her like a whisper through the spine. Was it just coincidence? The initial? The baby crib in the corner room? The drawing in the trunk? Or was the house trying to tell her something? She didn't believe in signs. Not really. But that night, she dreamed of a woman with hair like hers, humming softly as she wrote by lamplight. And when Maisie woke, she felt it in her bones. The cabin hadn't given up. It had been waiting. It was on the 5th morning that Maisie noticed the faint markings above the fireplace. She hadn't seen them before. Maybe they were covered by soot. Maybe she'd just been too tired. But now, in the soft slant of dawn light, she could make out faint letters scratched into the brick. She stood on a wooden chair, heart thudding, and reached up with a cloth to wipe it clean. 3 words. Leave the rest. Maisie stared at them, the phrase echoing in her chest. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a wish, a surrender. She stepped down carefully, knees aching, and sat back on the floor, her eyes never leaving those words. What had they meant to whoever carved them? Was it someone letting go? Or begging someone else not to? That afternoon the wind picked up sharp and sudden, whipping through the trees like an arrival. The cabin creaked, its bones flexing against the gusts, and Maisie lit the old stove just to cut the chill. She opened the chimney flue, and to her surprise, a small pile of blackened ash spilled onto the hearth. Not just soot. Paper ash. Her breath caught. Carefully, she used a spoon to sift through the mess. Tiny fragments of burned paper clung to the brick, some half-legible. She saw loops of cursive, the word sorry on one piece, and on another, the name, Jude. Jude. Maisie ran her fingers over the edge of the hearthstone, then sat back, stunned. Someone had burned letters. Here, in grief maybe. Or rage. Or both. She looked at the tin box again. Still sealed now, the rest of the letters untouched. Who had decided which ones to save, and which ones to turn to ash? Maisie took a pencil from her bag and scribbled the name Jude in her notebook, then drew a line beside it. She didn't know why. But she felt like she was tracing someone's footsteps, slowly, in the dark. That night, the wind howled louder. The candle on the table flickered, and Maisie whispered to the air, "I'm still here, and I'm listening." The next day, she found the photograph. It was tucked behind the crumbling mirror in the bedroom, faded, water-stained. A man with dark hair, shirt rolled at the sleeves, holding hands with a smiling woman in front of the same cabin, long before the porch had started to sag. Behind them stood an older woman, arms crossed, unsmiling. On the back, Jude, Marnie, and Eleanor 1955. Maisie stared at the name. Marnie. Not Maisie. But still, the same initial. The same haunted joy in her eyes. This wasn't her story. Not by blood, not by time. But somehow, it felt borrowed. Passed down like a secret waiting for the right hands to hold it. Maisie pressed the photo flat in her notebook beside the name Jude. And beneath it, she wrote something new. She didn't leave. She left it for someone who could carry it. The baby kicked. And Maisie whispered, "We're not alone in this, are we?" And the cabin creaking softly said nothing. But somehow, that silence felt like an answer. Maisie woke before dawn, the kind of waking where you don't know whether it was a sound or a feeling that pulled you from sleep. The cabin was quiet, but not empty. It breathed in its own way, timbers settling, wind slipping through the warped window frames, a distant owl saying it was still night somewhere. She sat up slowly, one hand cradling her belly. The baby shifted, a soft roll beneath her ribs. "Morning," she whispered. Her voice felt small, but steady. That day, she moved to the far end of the Brammer cabin, the room with the crib. She hadn't touched it yet. Not the crib, not the faded wallpaper with tiny blue flowers, not the rocking chair still angled toward the window like someone had left mid-song. Dust, thick as velvet, lay on every surface. Maisie brushed it away with a cloth and uncovered something carved into the crib's wooden rail. M.W. The same initials from the trunk. The same hand-carved style. She placed her palm over the letters. "Marnie Wren," she said aloud, testing the name from the photograph. Saying it felt like opening a door she had no right to open, but couldn't resist pushing anyway. She found more carvings, softer now, like someone had traced them over and over during long nights. On the underside of the chair arm, 3 words worn nearly smooth. "Come back home." Her throat tightened. Who had they been wishing for? Jude? A child? Someone already gone? Maisie sank into the rocking chair, its wood creaking beneath her. She closed her eyes, imagining the stories embedded in every dent, every scratch on the floor. A woman crying softly into her hands. A man pacing by the window. A letter left unread. She whispered into the stillness, "You're not forgotten." The cabin held its breath. She spent the rest of the morning cleaning that room gently, as if she were touching someone else's memory. She folded what remained of the tiny baby blanket, placed the porcelain shoe on the windowsill, right where the light fell warmest. At noon, she found another letter wedged between two wallboards behind the crib. It hadn't been hidden so much as lost. The paper crackled as she unfolded it carefully. "Marnie, if you go, I won't stop you. But I don't know how to stay here without you. The walls remember you. The wind carries your voice. If you ever hear it calling, come home. I'll be waiting on the porch." Jude Maisie pressed the letter to her chest. Her breath came uneven. Not because of sadness alone, but because it felt like this house was teaching her something about staying, about leaving, about love that didn't end just because people did. As dusk came, she stood in the doorway of the small room and whispered, "I'll finish what you couldn't." For the first time since she arrived, the cabin didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it was listening. The next morning, Maisie woke with purpose. Not comfort, her back ached. Her hands were raw, but purpose. She dragged her backpack to the porch, pulled out a bent hammer, 3 usable nails, and a half-empty box of screws she'd found in the kitchen drawer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The porch steps were first. The top plank had split clean through, jagged and dangerous. She removed it, breath shallow, muscles trembling. Every movement felt heavier with the weight of her belly, but she focused on the rhythm: lift, pull, breathe. She set a new plank in place, salvaged from a broken barn fence behind the cabin. It didn't match. It didn't matter. She brought the hammer down once, twice. On the third strike, the head of the nail bent sideways. Maisie swore under her breath, leaned back, wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her sleeve. "That's not how you set a nail." The voice startled her. She turned. At the edge of the dirt road stood an older man, gray beard, denim jacket patched at the elbows, a toolbox in one hand. Maisie's jaw tightened. "Cabin's not for sale." He smiled faintly. "Didn't ask. Name's Elias. Used to fix this place when it was still standing straight." She didn't answer. He nodded toward the bent nail. "Mind if I help?" She hesitated. Then handed him the hammer. Elias worked slowly, carefully. His hands were steady, his movements respectful, like he knew the cabin personally. Maybe he did. "You knew them?" she asked quietly. He paused. "Jude was my brother." The hammer stilled in his hand. Maisie breathed in, chest tight. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "This place died when they did. You're the first soul to walk inside without turning back." Silence stretched between them, soft, fragile. He finished the nail, then handed the hammer back. "You're doing it right," he said. "Just takes time." He didn't stay long. Just long enough to fix the first step beside her, leaving his toolbox at the door. "I'll be back tomorrow," he muttered, already walking away. That afternoon, Maisie worked until her hands shook. One board at a time. One broken thing made whole. She whispered to the cabin, to the baby, to no one and everyone. "We're staying. Do you hear me? We're staying." When evening came, she sat on the fixed step, the sun setting gold over the trees. She rested both hands on her stomach. The baby shifted, slow and steady. For the first time since she arrived, since Luke left, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was building. Not just a home, but a life. One nail at a time. The next morning, Elias returned, this time with more than just a toolbox. Maisie stood barefoot on the porch, brushing dust from her skirt, when she saw the truck roll in. Behind it came a second one. And a third. She didn't understand until they started climbing out. A woman with silver braids holding a bag of clean rags. A teenage boy balancing a stepladder. An elderly couple carrying jars of nails, a box fan, and a bag of something that smelled like cinnamon. Elias nodded toward her like it was nothing. "Told a few folks. Word gets around." Maisie's throat tightened. "I didn't ask for..." He raised a hand. "You didn't have to." They didn't knock. They didn't wait. They just moved quietly, kindly. Into the yard, onto the porch, through the door. The woman with the braids, Norma. She introduced herself, began scrubbing the stove with steel wool and lemon. The boy, Henry, tightened the window frames. Someone replaced a pane of glass in the kitchen without being asked. Maisie stood in the center of it all, stunned. No one questioned her. No one asked what she was doing there, or where the father was, or why she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. They just helped. By noon, the smell of something baking filled the house. The stove, long dead, had sparked to life after Henry rewired its connection. Someone found a tin of flour in a cupboard. Someone else brought over a pie crust. Maisie tried to protest. "I can't pay." Norma cut her off gently. "You already are." Maisie didn't understand. Until Norma smiled and added, "By staying." She learned slowly that this town hadn't forgotten the cabin. Or Marnie. Or Jude. They'd been part of something, a story whispered in kitchens and passed between neighbors like old quilts. They loved hard. Elias said that afternoon, standing by the porch rail. But they were stubborn, prideful, wouldn't ask for help, until it was too late. Maisie nodded. She knew that kind of love. She watched the others clean, patch, sweep, mend. Some brought food, some shared stories. One woman left a hand-stitched quilt folded on the bed, saying only, "It was Marnie's." And Maisie, still holding her belly, whispered softly, "We're part of something now." That evening, after everyone left, she walked through the house, touching every surface. The cabin no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like memory with its sleeves rolled up. She stood by the hearth, looking up at the words still faintly etched above. "Leave the rest." And for the first time, she thought maybe it didn't mean abandonment. Maybe it meant surrender. Maybe it meant that love, once planted deep enough, could outlast loss. Maisie sat in the rocker one more time, the baby shifting like waves in her belly. Outside, crickets sang under a rising moon. And inside the cabin, something like warmth began to settle into the walls again. It took 3 more days to clear out the last room. The one no one mentioned, the one with the door that didn't close properly, and a strange draft even when the windows were shut. Maisie had avoided it, not because of fear, but because it felt sacred, like it belonged to someone who hadn't said goodbye. But now, with the rest of the cabin breathing again, it was time. She opened the door just after dawn. The room was small, square, and filled with shadows. Dust floated like memory in the slats of sunlight that cut through the warped blinds. A trunk sat in the corner, different from the first. This one was leather-bound, cracked at the seams, with initials barely visible on the lid. J.R.W. Jude R. Wren. Maisie knelt, heart heavy, but steady. She opened the trunk slowly. Inside, a folded army uniform, yellowing photographs, and a weathered journal bound in soft leather. She picked up the journal, fingers trembling. On the first page, "From Marnie, if I don't come back." Her breath caught. She read in silence for what felt like hours. The entries were raw, filled with longing and regret, scratched in a hand that grew shakier with each page. Jude had gone to war, not because he wanted to leave, but because he thought it would fix something in him, in them. But he'd missed the birth of their daughter, and the funeral. Maisie stopped there. Her vision blurred. She turned the page. "I should have been there. I should have held her, even just once. I left trying to protect them, and came back with nothing but medals and silence." Maisie held the book to her chest, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. A daughter. They'd had a child. A girl who didn't survive. That crib. The rocking chair. The baby blanket. The weight of grief in the walls made sense now. And somehow, so did her own being there. It wasn't coincidence. It was continuity. Maisie stood and looked around the room, not as a stranger, but as a keeper, a bridge between past and future. She spent the rest of the day cleaning the room with care, wiping every wall, washing the windows, folding the uniform, and placing it back gently. She placed the journal in the crib, not to forget but to honor. That night, as stars bloomed in the sky, Maisie lit a candle in the center of the room. She whispered, she mattered. She was loved. And in the quiet, the wind outside softened. The draft that had always haunted the room faded. For the first time, the door closed without resistance. and Maisie smiled. Because that room was no longer haunted. It was healing. And it was ready finally for someone new. Maisie didn't mean to find it. She'd only been trying to scrub soot from the hearth, hoping to clear away the last of the dark stains. The others had offered to help again, but she'd gently declined. This part, it felt like something she had to do alone. Kneeling on the worn floorboards, she worked in slow circles, wiping gently. Then her rag caught on a seam between stones. A faint line, barely noticeable. She leaned closer. The center hearthstone had a groove. Carefully, she dug her fingers into the edge. It resisted at first, then lifted with a soft pop of settled dust. Beneath it, wrapped in waxed cloth, lay a small object. Heavy, rectangular, another journal. Maisie sat back, hands suddenly shaking. The cloth peeled away slowly, revealing a leather-bound book older, rougher than Jude's. She opened the first page and gasped. If you're reading this, it means you stayed. You saw past the rot and rust. You felt what we left behind. I am Marnie, and this is everything I never said aloud. Maisie read the words slowly, reverently. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a confession, a chronicle of grief, of losing a child, of Jude's absence during the hardest months. But more than that, it was a story of forgiveness. He came home with eyes that didn't match the man I married. He couldn't look at the crib, couldn't sit in the rocker. But he built things. Fixed the porch. Repaired the roof. Quiet things, but they were his way of apologizing. We loved again. Not with spark, but with embers. And it was enough. Maisie blinked tears away. The cabin hadn't just been a place where grief lived. It had been a place where healing had once begun. She read to the final page, where one last line was scrawled. If someone finds this, I hope you know some things don't need to be torn down to be made new. Sometimes all they need is to be held together. Maisie placed the journal beside Jude's in the crib. The room felt full, not of sadness, but of peace. Later that evening, she walked outside to find Elias waiting on the porch steps. He carried something wrapped in a linen cloth. I think she'd want you to have this, he said softly, holding it out. Inside was a wooden sign, hand-painted, the lettering faded but intact. The Wren House. Maisie traced the letters. She named it after him. Elias smiled. They both named it after what it gave them a place to return to. Maisie stared out at the trees. The sun was dipping low, gold spilling across the field. I'm not running anymore, she whispered. I think I'm finally home. Elias nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder, rough and warm. You're part of the story now. She knew he was right. Not just because of what she found, but because of what she'd become. Not a visitor, not a squatter, a steward. It rained the day the baby came. Not the loud, violent kind, but soft and steady like the sky was washing something clean. Maisie woke before dawn with the first ache low in her belly. By mid-morning, the contractions came like waves, and by afternoon, Elias had driven to town for help. Norma arrived with a midwife's kit, calm hands, and a voice that felt like weathered wood and warm blankets. You're safe, she whispered, brushing Maisie's hair back. This house has seen sorrow. It's time it sees life again. It wasn't easy. Hours passed in a blur of sweat, breath, and trembling. But when it was over, just as the last light of evening faded into mist, a cry rose up from the small bedroom. A daughter. Maisie held her close, forehead resting against the baby's, heart pounding like thunder far away. She's here, she whispered. You made it, little bird. They wrapped her in the same quilt Marnie once stitched. The colors were faded, but the warmth was still there. Outside, the rain softened even more, as if blessing what had begun inside those old walls. The town came in small waves over the next few days. They brought food, handmade toys, books, even a carved wooden mobile that Elias had made from scrap and cedar. Maisie named her daughter Wren. No middle name, no last name needed, for now. Just Wren for the house, for the legacy, for the strength in small things that still sing through the storm. She wrote Marnie's name above the crib on a flue, piece of driftwood, and hung it there. Not as a replacement. As gratitude. Days passed gently. Nights, even with the crying and sleeplessness, felt like they had purpose. Maisie no longer felt like she was rebuilding something, she was continuing it. One evening, she stood at the end of the gravel path, watching as the sun cast long shadows across the grass. She could see the porch she'd rebuilt with her own blistered hands, the rocking chair now hers, the faint outlines of the past stitched through every beam. Wren cooed in her arms. "Maybe one day," Maisie whispered, "you'll read those letters. Maybe you'll walk these rooms and understand what we found here." She looked down at her daughter's face, so new, yet somehow familiar. "But even if you don't," she said, "this place will always know you." She turned back toward the house, the wren house glowing soft under string lights Henry had installed across the porch. Inside, the journals were sealed, in a wooden box, resting on a shelf above the fireplace. Maisie had added her own letter, folded and tucked inside. Asterisk. To whoever finds this next. I didn't come here to belong. I came because I had nowhere else to go. But somehow, the cabin knew. And it gave me a second chance. If you're holding this, I hope you feel that too. Welcome home. Asterisk. As dusk settled over the trees, and a warm breeze rustled the leaves, Maisie stepped inside with Wren, closing the door gently behind them. Not to shut out the world, but to keep something sacred safe. And in the quiet, the house breathed alive once more.